In 1997, following in the footsteps of Mega Man 8, the Mega Man X series made the leap to 32-bit consoles. Initially planned as a Sega Saturn exclusive, Mega Man X4 ultimately went multi-platform, releasing on both the Saturn and PlayStation. The game introduces us to Repliforce, a militarized Maverick Hunter faction that becomes the scapegoat for the destruction of the aerial city Sky Lagoon. Branded as Mavericks, they declare independence, sparking the Great Repliforce War, a conflict seen by many humans as a dangerous rebellion, especially in light of Dr. Doppler's similar betrayal in X3. With tensions high, Hunters X and Zero are tasked with stopping the uprising. Visually, X4 is a huge step forward, easily the most graphically impressive Mega Man title yet. X and Zero are more detailed and fluidly animated than ever, and while the gameplay sticks to classic 2D, the backgrounds take advantage of the new hardware with layered 3D effects and impressive use of transparency that all serve as stark reminders of the jump in hardware. Though the Saturn version suffers minor downgrades, particularly in transparency and water rendering, the graphical showcase on either platform is a testament to Capcom's skill, especially considering how the PlayStation wasn't really designed with 2D games in mind. In fact, X4 almost didn't come to the PlayStation at all. Sony originally had a policy against licensing 2D games, aiming to keep the PlayStation from being conceived as outdated. Capcom initially responded by developing Mega Man 8 as a Saturn exclusive, and once Sony realized that this hardline stance would simply drive developers to their competitors, they quietly reversed course. This insistence on 3D wasn't just marketing bluster, there were real technical hurdles too. The PlayStation's sprite handling capabilities lagged behind the Saturn's, which, despite its batshit crazy internal architecture, had more internal RAM and even expandable memory via external cartridges. To work around this, Capcom devised a clever solution during the creation of Mega Man 8. Instead of traditional sprites, characters and assets are essentially textures mapped onto flat polygons, in order to simulate 2D graphics. And this was a tactic many other developers would use when creating 2D visuals for the console. Unlike Mega Man 8, though, which was developed for Saturn first and then ported to PlayStation, X4 was the reverse, built primarily for PlayStation and later adapted for Saturn, hence the lack of platform-exclusive content and the Saturn version's graphical compromises. And thanks to the relatively simple nature of X4's visuals, the game runs at a smooth frame rate, with responsive controls and virtually unnoticeable load times. Stages are split into two halves, likely due to memory constraints, but transitions are still quick and snappy. Even the warning graphic that pops up before boss fights is there to cleverly mask a loading screen. By this point, Capcom knew the PlayStation architecture well and how to work around its shortcomings. One of X4's most defining features is the ability to play as either X or Zero from the outset. This isn't a gimmick anymore. Zero is no longer a nigh-useless novelty. He has a fully distinct playstyle, relying on close-range sword combos and special techniques rather than projectile weapons. Zero completely lacks a buster this time, replaced with a 3-hit sword combo, and instead of copying bosses' weapons like X does, Zero gains new abilities each time he defeats a Maverick. Most of his techniques don't use ammo, but the trade-off is the risk inherent in melee combat. He also doesn't receive any armor upgrades, making his campaign an entirely different experience. This duality comes with design trade-offs. Because every stage needs to be beatable by both characters, the overall difficulty is more forgiving than in previous entries. Like in Mega Man 8, each stage's halfway checkpoint completely refills your health and ammo, as does each life lost, and health and ammo refills are extremely generous in both drop rate and potency. Frost Walrus's stage even offers an easy farming spot for filling your tanks. The new EX tank boosts your starting life count from 2 to 4, enemies are far less time-consuming than they were in X3, and the special weapon and armor upgrades border on overpowered, with X's helmet upgrade essentially granting permanent unlimited ammo. One boss can even be fought using a ride armor if you manage to ride it all the way to their arena, essentially acting as an extra health gauge. But the bosses still bring the heat. Unlike in X3, where weaknesses could completely trivialize fights, X4's bosses are tough but fair, with learnable patterns that reward patience and observation. Using the correct weakness gives you an edge in that you'll deal extra damage and sometimes throw bosses off their attack patterns if timed right, but they're not so effective as to become instant win buttons like in X3. Sigma's 3-phase final battle is particularly intense, with Phase 3 consisting of 2 alternating forms with separate health bars. Daunting at first, but satisfying once you crack the code. Two playable characters also means double the special weapons and upgrades. X's arsenal is largely projectile-based as usual, while Zero's revolves around swordplay, movement, and flashy techniques, some of which are directly inspired by classic Street Fighter moves. For example, Ryuengin and the charged version of Rising Fire are both variations on the Shoryuken. Both are also crucial in gameplay, as they're the only weapons capable of damaging Sigma's first form. He's immune to everything else, even X's standard buster. And Ryuengin is effective against a staggering 5 different bosses, making it one of Zero's most useful tools. Lightning Web is another standout. Not only is it a projectile, but it also doubles as a makeshift wall that X can cling to and bounce from, essential for some of the game's trickier platforming segments. Zero's equivalent is Raijin-Geki, a slow multi-hit thrust that can also be seamlessly chained into his basic combo. Then there's Soul Body, which generates a ghostly duplicate that acts as a projectile. When charged, you can even control that duplicate independently. Zero's counterparts, Qenbu and Qenzan, provide a double jump and a powerful aerial slash respectively, giving him excellent vertical mobility and crowd control. Aiming Laser is a bit tricky to use effectively, but it can be devastating if you learn to line it up quickly. Zero's Rakuhoha is his version of a Giga attack, a massive screen-clearing blast, and notably the only one of his weapons that runs unlimited ammo. Double Cyclone is a spiritual successor to Storm Tornado, dishing out wide, sweeping damage. Its counterpart, Tenkuha, enhances Zero's Z-Saber, letting him deflect and slice through enemy projectiles. Ground Hunter is your standard wall-crawling weapon, useful for angled attacks and hitting enemies from a distance. Zero's Hienkyaku, by contrast, is a mobility tool that lets him perform mid-air dashes, extending his aerial options. Twin Slasher fires 2 piercing diagonal shots, while Shipuga is a fierce dash-slash attack that gives Zero an aggressive momentum-based option during combat. Finally, there's Frost Tower and Hyoretsuzan. Frost Tower can act as a quick-deploying shield or, when charged, a devastating screen-wide ice attack. Hyoretsuzan is a downward ice stab, great for finishing enemies below or chaining into combo routes. The sheer variety of weapons adds real tactical depth to each character's playthrough. X excels at picking off enemies from a distance, relying on a wide array of projectiles to adapt to different situations. Zero, on the other hand, takes a more aggressive close-quarters approach. His techniques often strike multiple times, allowing him to dispatch enemies faster, but at the cost of exposing himself to greater risk. However, only X has access to the series' signature armor upgrades, which in this entry combine to form what's known as the 4th armor. Though it's almost certainly supposed to be Force armor, given the katakana, naming aside, these are easily some of the best upgrades in the series. The feet part grants both a mid-air dash and a hover ability, allowing for better control in tricky platforming sections, or helping you stay just out of an enemy's range. The body part reduces damage taken, and any damage incurred charges up the Nova Strike, a powerful dash attack that deals massive damage. This time around, you're given a choice between 2 different buster upgrades. Stock Charge lets you store up to 4 fully charged shots at once to fire on command, while Plasma Shot causes charged blasts to linger and deal continuous damage. Plasma Shot is especially strong, so much so that it can make many of your special weapons feel redundant. But the real game changer is the aforementioned Helmet upgrade, which gives X infinite ammo for every weapon as long as you don't charge them. Of course, if you don't feel like taking part in the scavenger hunts, there's a cheat code on the title screen that grants you the Ultimate Armor. This version of X comes fully equipped with every upgrade and unlimited uses of the Nova Strike. There's also a similar code for Zero that unlocks Black Zero, though it's purely cosmetic. A functional armor set for Zero was apparently planned at some point, but was cut from the final game. Unlike earlier entries, there's no secret super weapon hidden away this time, but honestly, the standard upgrades and weapons are so powerful that you never really feel like you're missing one. For the first time, X and Zero truly feel like the elite Maverick Hunters the stories always said they were. Outside of boss fights, the stages themselves are a definite improvement over X3's somewhat uninspired layouts, and cameos like Chill Penguin and Blizzard Buffalo in Frost Walrus's level give longtime fans a nod. Jet Stingray's infamous auto-scrolling bike level catches a lot of flack for its trial-and-error design, but I honestly didn't mind it. It's short, fast-paced, and far less frustrating than Mega Man 8's snowboarding levels, and I was able to clear it and collect both upgrades along the way after just 2 or 3 tries. No, my bigger gripe is with Cyber Peacock's time attack segments. There, you're graded based on how fast you can complete 3 timed obstacle courses, each one rewarding you with a new upgrade if you're fast enough. Simply reaching the goal at all allows you to move on regardless, but if you're too slow to earn the upgrades, your only option is to play the entire level again. I like the idea, but replaying the whole stage just to retry 1 or 2 rooms gets old quickly. Other levels have their own rough spots. For instance, Storm Owl's spike-lined shaft leading to the Buster upgrades requires a particularly tight jump using Lightning Web, demanding near-perfect timing with very little room for error. Still, on the whole, level design here is more consistent and engaging than in X2 or especially X3, and moment-to-moment gameplay remains a highlight. Throughout both playthroughs, it became clear where the dev team's priorities were. This is Zero's game. Mega Man may be the name in the title, and X may be in front on the cover, but it's Zero who gets the focus here. X3 was technically his first playable appearance, but there he was little more than a weaker version of X with a sword slapped onto his Buster combo. If you died while using Zero even once, he'd be gone for the rest of the game, and you couldn't even bring him into boss fights, amounting him to little more than a clunky gimmick. In X4, though, he's fully realized with his own gameplay style, his own narrative arc, and more emotional weight. The story of X4 is easily the most ambitious in the franchise up to this point, though in practice it falls flat in more than a few places. I get that it's still largely aimed at kids, which probably explains why Sigma is so blatantly telegraphed as the villain within the first 5 minutes, and why the general has his giant goofy metal mustache, but even within those bounds, the plot doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The whole Repliforce storyline, for example, feels like nonsense. None of the characters' motivations seem to make much sense. Magma Dragoon's betrayal boils down to him just wanting to fight X and/or Zero. I understand that the Sigma virus is supposed to cause some degree of madness in Reploids, but that's still an absurdly thin excuse to justify plunging the world into war. The idea of Repliforce demanding independence has potential, but the execution makes them seem, at best, rash and gullible. At one point during my playthrough, I actually texted my co-writer, who knows Mega Man lore way better than I do, just to confirm that I wasn't missing something, and that, yeah, these characters really are just making nonsense decisions. Still, there are some great ideas here. We finally get confirmation that Zero was Dr. Wily's final creation, something that's been hinted at since X1, and not only that, he's also the true source of the Maverick virus, an ironic twist that reshapes the entire series' context. In X's ending, he begins to question whether he might one day fall victim to the virus himself, a moment that serves as early foreshadowing for the Mega Man Zero games down the line. Or at least that was the plan. It's complicated. Some visual details also add subtle storytelling flourishes, such as Maverick bosses having different life bars than Repliforce bosses. And while I found Double contrived as both a character and a boss fight, there's a clever bit of design where using his weakness actually makes the fight harder. His body breaks apart and turns into drones that attack you. Just like in Mega Man 8, both playable characters and all the bosses have voiced soundbites during gameplay, and for the first time in the series, each boss fight kicks off with a short dialogue exchange. These are small additions, but it helps flesh out these characters' personalities, and makes the bosses feel like more than just obligatory obstacles to overcome. What I'm less fond of is the way the story introduces new characters seemingly just to kill them off. Namely, the two helper characters, Double and Iris. Both end up betraying our protagonists before the credits roll. Wait, the guy named Double was a double agent the whole time? Egads. But what really bothers me is how the game treats Iris like she's some long-established character. We're told she's a close friend of Zero, borderline love interest, but this is her first appearance. Most of her backstory, and that of the Repliforce in general, is tucked away in the game's instruction manual. That was still a common practice for many games at the time, but it was already starting to feel outdated as in-game storytelling became more sophisticated. Iris barely does anything leading up to her betrayal, making her sudden shift and subsequent death feel forced rather than tragic. The same goes for Double, only more so because at least Zero and Iris have some kind of implied relationship. Double and X barely interact at all and have no prior history. He exists purely to serve as a twist villain for the sake of having a twist villain, contributing absolutely nothing meaningful to the plot. Another issue I've always had with the Mega Man games in general is just how empty their worlds feel, and unfortunately X4 is no exception. In fact, it might be the worst offender so far. We're constantly told throughout all of these games that the Mavericks pose a threat to civilization and that the stakes are sky high, but we're never shown what that world actually looks like. There's almost no human presence. In fact, X4 doesn't feature a single human character. The entire reason the Maverick Rebellion and Repliforce's coup are framed as such a dire crisis is because they supposedly endanger human lives, but if we never see any humans, what's the point? As far as the story is concerned, the humans might as well not even exist. Without that emotional anchor, the war at the center of the game's story feels hollow, and sadly, this is a problem throughout this series. Ultimately, the narrative just doesn't land. Capcom was clearly aiming for morally complex villains and a tragic arc, but Repliforce's seemingly instant decision to turn against humanity makes them seem naive at best, dangerously incompetent at worst. If more of them had been infected by the Sigma virus, that might have added a layer of believability, but no, the Repliforce leaders all appear to be of fully sound mind. What was supposed to feel like a fall from grace ends up looking more like a childish tantrum, undermining whatever moral ambiguity the story was trying to create. Even so, I might have been able to invest myself in the story if the voice acting weren't so distractingly awful. We've got animated FMVs again, just like in Mega Man 8, and unfortunately all the problems from that game's voice work return too, along with many of the same actors. Once again, we're given performances that don't really fit these characters. X has the same actress as classic Mega Man from 8, but given that X is meant to be older, more thoughtful, and a little more jaded, that casting feels off here. The Colonel reuses Swordman's actor, really cornering the market on red Australian swordsmen, while Iris's actress seems to be attempting, I think, a British accent, maybe?
Brother, please, don't you remember? Zero saved my life!
The only voice that even kind of works is Sigma's, and that's mostly because he's already such a cartoonishly evil villain that a goofy, over-the-top performance somehow feels appropriate. Just like before, we've got actors who clearly didn't understand the script, sleepwalking their way through stilted dialogue with flat delivery, bizarre line readings, and weird mispronunciations.
It's not too late. Stop the coup now!
And the only scene in the game where an actor even kind of tries to inject some emotional gravitas ends up producing one of the most infamous and unintentionally hilarious moments in the entire series.
Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What am I fighting for?
Mega Man X4 so badly wants to be taken seriously. It wants its themes to come off as meaningful, its villains to be tragic, and its heroes to struggle emotionally. But between the awkward writing and the laughably poor voice acting, it ends up feeling less like Ghost in the Shell and more like The Room. The game wants to be treated as emotionally mature, but ends up teetering into unintentional camp. Still, gameplay wins the day here. Mega Man X4 may not be narratively airtight, but it plays like a dream. Zero finally gets his due, and while the story's ambitions exceed its execution, you can ignore all that and still have a blast with what is arguably the best Mega Man game since the original X. Both narratively and mechanically, the focus is clearly on Zero this time, and considering he was always intended to be the franchise's successor, it's refreshing to see him given proper development, rather than being used as a glorified plot device. Even if the story falls apart under even the lightest scrutiny, you can still tell what it was trying to do, and while the core structure doesn't radically reinvent the series' formula, the addition of a fully playable Zero adds real replay value and mechanical depth. Given how central Zero becomes to this franchise moving forward, X4 ends up being a pretty pivotal entry. And more importantly, despite all its flaws, the game is just plain fun. Personally, I enjoyed this one far more than X3 and even X2. Critical reception at the time was positive, albeit tempered. Reviewers appreciated the tight gameplay, but noted the lack of innovation, and some were disappointed that the game stuck with 2D visuals during the peak of the 3D revolution. Sony's 3D-only policy might seem misguided in hindsight, and was controversial even at the time, but within the gaming landscape of that era, it was a savvy, if extreme, business move. While 2D versus 3D is largely a stylistic choice today, back then 2D was seen as inherently less advanced, outdated, boring. 3D was the future, while 2D was old hat. And though many early 3D games have perhaps aged poorly, the industry at large was chasing novelty and innovation, not longevity. So, with Mega Man X4 behind us and the industry shifting rapidly toward 3D, the next time we return to Mega Man, it'll be for a spin-off series built from the ground up to meet those changing expectations. One might say it adds just a little dash of something new.